Hi everyone, welcome back to the Hidden Motives crime series. Today we're looking at another deeply saddening case. It's a quiet street in southwest London. Rows of houses sit close together, doors shut, windows catching the last of the afternoon light. From the outside it looks like any other neighborhood. Calm, familiar, the kind of place where nothing seems out of the ordinary. Inside one of those homes lived a young woman named Sophie Lionnet. Sophie had come to London to work as an au pair. Like many people her age, she was hoping to learn, to earn, and to build something for herself far from home. She was careful, kind, and trusting. Those traits shaped how she moved through the world, and, in the end, they left her vulnerable. The people who hired her were supposed to look out for her. They were meant to offer guidance, stability, and a safe place to live. Instead, behind closed doors, something very different was unfolding. Trust slowly gave way to suspicion. Suspicion turned into control, and that control would eventually become lethal. By the time police were called to the house, they would uncover a reality no one on the street could have guessed. A hidden pattern of abuse, and a life that ended much too early. This is the story of Sabrina Cuidder. It's a story about fixation, manipulation, and how a young woman lost her life in a place that should have protected her. Before her name ever appeared in court documents or news reports, Sophie Lionnet was just a young woman trying to find her footing. She grew up in France, close to her family. People who knew her described her as quiet and thoughtful. She wasn't someone who liked confrontation. She listened more than she spoke. At 21, Sophie wasn't chasing excitement or attention. Her goals were modest. She wanted independence. She wanted to improve her English, and she wanted to experience life beyond the world she already knew. Working as an au pair made sense. It offered a way to live abroad, earn some money, and gain experience while doing work that relied heavily on trust. That trust would cost her everything. The family Sophie went to work for lived in Southfields, a comfortable neighborhood in southwest London. Their house was spacious and well kept. Nothing about it stood out as unusual. It looked like the kind of home where a young woman would be safe. Sophie was hired by Sabrina Cuidder and her partner, Wissem Medouni. To people on the outside, Cuidder came across as confident and self-assured. She described herself as a stylist, a makeup artist, a fashion designer. She spoke about connections to celebrities and creative work. She dressed well, spoke convincingly, and appeared to have control over her life. But beneath that image was a deep instability that had been building for years. Long before Sophie arrived in London, Sabrina Cuidder had become fixated on her former partner, Mark Walton, one of the founding members of the pop group Boyzone. Their relationship had ended long ago, but for Cuidder, it never really ended. Over time, she repeatedly contacted police, accusing Walton of harassing her, spying on her, and orchestrating events in her life from a distance. She claimed he was manipulating people around her, that he was watching her, that he posed a constant threat. Each report was investigated, and each time, authorities found no evidence to support her claims. Still, the belief never faded. By the time Sophie entered the household, Cuidder's thinking had become increasingly narrow. Suspicion shaped how she interpreted the world. Ordinary actions felt loaded with meaning. Small mistakes were seen as signs of disloyalty. At first, Sophie's job looked like what she had signed up for, caring for the children, helping around the house, adjusting to life in a new country. Then things began to change. Cuidder started monitoring Sophie more closely, listening in on her phone calls, questioning where she went and who she spoke to. In Cuidder's mind, Sophie was no longer just an employee. She had become a threat. Cuidder convinced herself that Sophie was communicating with Mark Walton, that she had been sent into the house deliberately, that private conversations were being shared behind her back. There was no proof, no messages, no contact at all. But proof didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the belief. And once that belief took hold, Sophie's role in the household shifted completely. She was no longer treated as a young woman far from home. She had become someone to confront. And what started as suspicion quickly turned into something far more dangerous. Behind closed doors, the questioning had already begun. It didn't happen all at once. There was no sudden outburst, no single moment that changed everything. Instead, the house began to feel smaller, tighter, heavier, almost without anyone noticing. Each day, Sophie had less space to move, less room to breathe. The questions started small. Who had she spoken to that day? Why had she looked at her phone so often? What did certain messages really mean? At first, Sophie answered calmly. She explained herself. She reassured them. She denied accusations that didn't make sense, but reassurance wasn't what they wanted. Soon, the questioning became something else entirely. Kuider and her partner, Wissam Madouni, started recording Sophie audio and video, long sessions meant to catch what they believed were lies. They told her it was necessary, that the truth would come out, that resisting would only make things worse. Sophie was isolated, far from her family, far from anyone who might step in. The balance of power was clear. Days passed, the interrogations grew more intense. She was accused of betrayal, of deceit, of secretly working for someone she had never even met. Each denial only added to their certainty. Each attempt to explain only convinced them she was hiding something. The goal was no longer understanding. It was confession. Later, prosecutors described these sessions as relentless. Sophie was deprived of sleep. She was humiliated. She was forced to repeat statements over and over until her voice went weak and her words lost meaning. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because exhaustion makes resistance almost impossible. In the recordings played at trial, Sophie sounds confused, scared, desperate for the questioning to stop. Sometimes she even agrees with accusations that contradict each other, not because they're true, but because she's terrified. And what makes this even more chilling is that none of it was hidden. Kuider and Madouni kept it all. Hours of footage they believed would prove they were right. Instead, it became the clearest record of Sophie's suffering. Even then, it wasn't enough. In Kuider's mind, Sophie wasn't just lying. She was refusing to confess. And refusal wasn't seen as innocence, it was defiance. By this point, Sophie was no longer an au pair. She was a prisoner of someone else's obsession. And the situation was about to cross a line it could never come back from. By mid-September 2017, the household had reached a breaking point. The questioning didn't stop. The recordings continued. And Sophie's physical and emotional state was visibly worsening. She was exhausted, frightened, trapped in a cycle she couldn't escape. What Kuider and Madouni framed as an attempt to uncover the truth had become something else, a closed system where every answer was wrong and every silence proved guilt. As days passed, the pressure never eased. Prosecutors later told the court that Sophie faced sustained mistreatment, not a single act, but a pattern that left her physically weak and emotionally drained. At some point during the night, she collapsed. No one called for help. No one tried to save her. Instead, the violence that had been building in the house reached its terrible conclusion. In the early hours of September 20th, neighbors noticed smoke in the garden. Firefighters were called. What they found immediately set off alarms. In the back garden, investigators discovered human remains, deliberately burned. Forensic analysis later confirmed the victim was Sophie Lionnet. The autopsy showed multiple injuries, bruises, fractures, internal trauma that pointed to repeated physical assault, not a single incident. The cause of death was clear. Sophie had been injured while she was still alive. The fire hadn't killed her. It had come afterward. When questioned, Wissam Madouni claimed the fire was meant to dispose of animal remains. The explanation didn't hold up. Nothing at the scene matched that story. Sabrina Kuider wasn't at the house when emergency services arrived. She returned later with her children, telling police that Sophie had run away. But the evidence inside the house told a very different story. Investigators found recording devices, digital files, and footage documenting Sophie's final days, materials Kuider and Madouni had created themselves, convinced it would one day justify their actions. Instead, it captured the crime. This wasn't a tragedy caused by chance. It was the result of obsession left unchecked, power misused behind closed doors, and a young woman whose vulnerability was mistaken for guilt. As the investigation unfolded, one question became impossible to ignore. How had two people come to believe that cruelty was truth and that violence was justified? Once Sophie's identity was confirmed, the investigation moved quickly. Not because the answers were obvious, but because the evidence was everywhere. This wasn't a secret crime. It had been documented. Detectives recovered multiple devices from the house: phones, cameras, storage drives. Inside them, they found hours of recordings, not surveillance taken secretly, not footage captured by outsiders. All of it was created by Kuider and Meduni themselves. Videos and audio showed Sophie being questioned repeatedly, trying to explain herself, struggling under the weight of constant accusations. To investigators, these recordings didn't show guilt. They showed fear. When police interviewed Kuider and Meduni, their stories didn't add up. Each denied responsibility. Each downplayed their role. Each suggested the other had done more. Kuider said she believed Sophie was dangerous. Meduni said he was only going along with events he didn't fully understand. But neither story matched the digital evidence. Investigators mapped Sophie's final days, minute by minute. The recordings showed long stretches of questioning. The forensic evidence showed repeated injuries. The fire showed an attempt to hide what had happened. Nothing suggested a sudden loss of control or an accidental death. The pattern was clear: sustained mistreatment, followed by deliberate action after Sophie was already dead. One detail stood out. Despite claiming fear of Sophie, Kuider and Meduni never contacted authorities. No emergency call, no attempt to get help, no request for police involvement. The only people who thought Sophie was dangerous were the ones controlling her. As the trial approached, prosecutors shaped a case based not on guesswork, but on the defendant's own actions. They argued that Sophie had been trapped inside a delusional system she had no way to escape. And the recordings? They weren't proof of innocence, as Kuider believed. They were proof of cruelty. By the time charges were filed, investigators were confident in one conclusion: this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't self-defense, and it wasn't just mental confusion. It was a case of obsession, abuse of power, and accountability. Before long, a jury would be asked to decide whether that responsibility amounted to murder. When the case reached the courtroom, one question hung over everything. Why? Why would two adults treat a young woman in their care this way? Why did suspicion turn into control? And how did belief become justification? The prosecution's answer was straightforward. This wasn't just anger, it was obsession. For years, Sabrina Kuider had been fixated on her former partner, Mark Walton. Long after their relationship ended, she continued to see him as a hidden force in her life. Someone watching, influencing events, manipulating people from a distance. She reported him to the police repeatedly, accusing him of harassment, intimidation, and control. Each time, authorities investigated. Each time, there was no evidence, but that didn't change her mind. When Sophie arrived in Kuider's household, prosecutors argued she unknowingly stepped into the center of that obsession. Sophie became a convenient explanation, a living symbol for Kuider's fears. She was close enough to monitor, question, and eventually blame. In Kuider's story, Sophie wasn't just an employee, she was an accomplice. But that theory quickly unraveled in court. Mark Walton testified that he had never met Sophie. There were no messages, no contact, no communication of any kind. The conspiracy Kuider described existed only in her mind. As the trial went on, contradictions between the defendants became impossible to ignore. Kuider said she was scared, claiming Sophie posed a real danger. Meduni said he had been swept along by Kuider, drawn into events he didn't fully control. Each tried to shift responsibility, each tried to downplay their own role. But the recordings told a different story. The footage showed both of them actively taking part, questioning, pressuring, directing Sophie's responses. This wasn't one person coercing and the other going along. It was collaboration. And perhaps the most damning question of all, if Sophie really was a threat, dangerous, deceptive criminal, why was she never reported? Why wasn't there a call to police? No effort to remove her safely from the house? No attempt to get help? Instead, Kuider and Meduni handled it themselves. They became interrogators, judges, and enforcers, guided not by evidence, but by belief. The prosecution argued that motive didn't need to be logical. It only needed certainty. Certainty built on obsession, reinforced by control, protected by isolation. By the time Sophie collapsed, the defendants weren't searching for truth anymore. They were trying to make it happen. With motive established and contradictions exposed, the jury faced one final question. Did belief excuse brutality, or did it reveal responsibility? The The trial of Sabrina Kuder and Wissam Medouni began at London's Old Bailey in the spring of 2018. Inside the courtroom, the focus shifted from investigation to judgment. For the jury, this wasn't just about what happened to Sophie Lionnet, it was about how it happened and who allowed it to happen. Prosecutors laid out the case step by step. They described a young woman isolated in a home, subjected to ongoing mistreatment by the people who were supposed to care for her. They emphasized that this wasn't a single moment of losing control, but a pattern of behavior that escalated over time. Central to their case were the recordings. Hours of footage played in court showing Sophie's fear, her confusion, material the defendants themselves had made. The prosecution described her treatment as cruel and inhumane, arguing it directly led to her death. The defense offered a very different story. Kuder's lawyers said she truly believed Sophie was dangerous and that her actions came from fear, not malice. Medouni's team argued he had been under Kuder's influence, caught in a situation he couldn't fully control. Both denied responsibility for Sophie's death. Each suggested the other was to blame. But the jury was asked to consider actions, not excuses. They were reminded that neither defendant reached out for help, that neither contacted the authorities, that neither tried to protect Sophie once it was obvious she was vulnerable. Instead, they continued. After weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated carefully, weighing belief against behavior, intent against outcome. On May 24, 2018, they returned with their verdict. Both Sabrina Kuder and Wissam Medouni were found guilty of murder. The courtroom absorbed the decision quietly. There were no dramatic outbursts, just the weight of a conclusion that could not be undone. At sentencing, the judge described the crime as one of sustained cruelty. Kuder and Medouni were each given life imprisonment, with a minimum of 30 years before parole could be considered. The punishment reflected not only Sophie's death, but the long, painful suffering that led up to it. Sophie's family spoke of a daughter who trusted easily, who believed in kindness, and who never imagined that harm could come from the very people meant to protect her. They spoke of a loss that could never be repaired. The trial was over. The verdict delivered. But the questions left behind didn't disappear. When the courtroom doors closed, the legal case ended. But Sophie Lionet's impact didn't. For her family, life split into a clear before and after. A future that once felt open, now permanently changed. Sophie's parents described the pain of knowing she died far from home, in a place she believed was safe. She had trusted the people who employed her. She had trusted the situation she walked into. That trust was never returned. Sophie is remembered not for how she died, but for how she lived. Quiet, thoughtful, kind. A young woman who wanted to work, to learn, to grow, unaware of the instability surrounding her. The house in Southfield still stands. From the outside, nothing marks what happened there. No signs, no memorial. Just walls that once hid a private reality no one else could see. And that raises uncomfortable questions. How much responsibility reaches beyond the individuals convicted? Kuder had reported her fears repeatedly over several years. Authorities investigated, found nothing, and moved on. But her fixation never stopped. Could more have been done? Were warning signs missed? The case also forces a broader conversation about vulnerability, about young people working abroad, about power dynamics inside private homes, about how quickly isolation can turn into control when oversight disappears. Sophie had no safety net, no easy way out once suspicion replaced trust. And then there's the question of belief. At what point does conviction become dangerous? When does fear stop being personal and start harming others? Kuder believed she was uncovering the truth, but belief left unchecked can justify almost anything. Sophie Lionet's life was taken long before it ever had a chance to unfold. Her story is a reminder, not just of cruelty, but of the quiet spaces where harm can grow unnoticed, behind closed doors, inside ordinary homes, in the absence of accountability. And one question remains, one that no verdict can fully answer. If trust is the foundation of care, how do we protect those who give it so freely? If you found this story meaningful, join our community by subscribing and turning on notifications. Every subscriber helps us continue sharing stories that matter.